we're Ruth and Ted, and we're talking to Loretta, so the voice you hear will be hers in the background.
Okay, well, it's good to be talking to you today. I'd like to just go very, very briefly into your backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And Ted, can you tell me where your ancestors came from?
My father was born in Greece, where a little town called Mawiliana, Arcadia, in the Peloponnese part of Greece. That's about all I know about.
Have you ever been back there
No,
to visit your birthplace?
not me.
Not you.
Nor my father.
Okay.
After he came,
After his death.
he came here when he was only 20 years old, 18 years old,
Oh,
and he never did return. Never had the desire to.
okay. And how about you, Ruth? Your ancestors?
Well, in doing genealogy, I've discovered that both of my parents were descended, at least on my father's side, 2 lines, my mother's side, 1 line, from the Mayflower Pilgrims, and that they were actually 8th cousins, which is interesting. I'm sure they didn't know that, but...
So the oldest relative that you remember is who?
For me, it would be, I never met my mother's mother, so that grandmother I didn't know. My father's mother died when I was 7 years old, so I don't have too much of a memory of her other than being at her funeral, which I remember vividly. In those days, they laid them out at home, and I still have that vision from when I was a kid. Both grandfathers I have memories of. So one of them died when I was a teenager, and one died when I was in my 20s.
Oh, okay. And where were you born?
I was born in Brockton, Massachusetts on July 10th, 1936 at 5:45, and my twin brother was born at 6 o'clock in the evening.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
And Ted, where were you born?
I was born in New York City in December 22nd, 1921.
Mm.
And what was I going to say after that? And
at the Bellevue Hospital.
at the Bellevue Hospital on the east side of Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it.
What do you remember? What are some of your memories of when you were a child?
Oh God. My earliest recollection was looking through, it was Christmas, and we peeked from our bedroom into the front room per se. That's my earliest recollection of
What
that
did
was
you
it.
see when you peeked?
My parents had putting the gifts under the tree.
Were there any special Greek traditions that you lived with?
No, I don't. No, because my dad came from Greece. He was fluent in his own language, and plus he spoke very good English. My mother was brought up in a German, and she went to German school, German parochial school.
Mm-hmm.
She was fluent in German, and I got robbed out of both languages because neither practiced on us or passed it on. So
Probably just a few
that was a
words.
minus for us, or I always thought so anyway.
Do you have any memories of your best friends when you were young?
That young, no. Well, no, not
When you were
really.
growing up in school? Do you remember who your...
I don't remember any because it was in the lower grades.
Mhm.
By the time I left New York, I was, I don't know, 4th grade, 5th grade, I guess.
I see.
And even then I moved out. But
And you
anyway,
left New York for what reason?
Lowell, Massachusetts.
Oh, you moved.
Yeah.
And what was the reason you moved?
Well, my father worked long hours. He had a business of his own, and he had a stroke, and he was paralyzed. And I forgot how young he was, about 50-something. And my mother, at that time, had 3 children, and we were all young. I was the oldest, 12 years old, say. and my sister was, if I was 12, she was probably 10, my brother was 9. So that was kind of hard on my mother because we didn't know, or that she didn't know really. It was such a shock because he did. He worked he worked long hours, practically every day of the week. And his only relative was an uncle who lived in Lowell, and he came down.
His
when
brother, excuse me, his brother lived in Lowell.
My brother, what did I say?
His brother, your father's brother lived in Lowell.
Lived
yeah.
in Lowell, and he came down. And in the course of him in the hospital and getting out, and losing the business naturally, he couldn't go back to work. He decided to come to Lowell and live next to his brother. And that's how we transferred from Lowell, New York to Lowell, Mass. In 1933 was the year.
And you had how many siblings?
I had a brother and a sister,
And you were the
oldest.
oldest, so that was a lot of responsibility.
A lot.
And how about you, Ruth? You were born into a family,
Yeah,
mom and dad.
yeah. And
Okay.
actually, I was the oldest, 15 minutes older than my brother.
Okay.
And then I had a younger sister who was 8 years younger than I was.
And what were the names of your siblings?
My brother was Roger and my sister was Lillian. So,
Tell me about your parents.
my dad was a mechanic. He owned his own garage in Brockton. But we lived in 3 different apartments, I guess, when we were little. And probably my earliest memory was when I was about 4 years old. We lived in a house in East Bridgewater. And my dad was still working at the garage as a mechanic. But I have some memories of when we were probably 4 or 5 years old, the Iceman coming around. And that was a big summertime treat because he'd pull up in the horse and wagon and use his ice pick to chop off the chunk of ice for the ice box. And we'd gather up the chunks of ice, the little chips of ice, and suck on those in the summertime. And so that was a big treat. We always waited for him to come by.
Did you play a lot with your siblings?
I remember too in that same time frame and in that same house on Whitman Street in East Bridgewater, playing with my brother. My mother would take a cardboard box and cut doors and windows, and we'd lay on the living room rug and with his cars and trucks and playing garage. And I was trying to remember, did I have a special doll? And I know I had dolls. I know I played with dolls, but I just don't have a recollection of anyone that's special. But my mother had a doll with a porcelain face from her youth, and somehow or other my brother and I broke that doll. I remember my mother being very upset over it. But they were good memories.
Tell me a little bit about school years, when you were in grade school. Did you have best friends?
Well, my cousin, my brother and I were in the same class, but I also had a first cousin who was in the same class in school. So I think the 3 of us, more or less, were best friends. I don't remember. I should correct that. I do remember going to a friend's house that lived right up the street, and she had a swing in her basement, and we used to do something like sing a song that we were familiar with. So as long as we would sing that song, we could swing. Then we'd take turns. It would be my turn after she finished her song, and we'd take turns doing that. But we mostly played with each other as cousins and siblings.
Ted, do you remember the name of the school you attended as a child?
PS 104, I believe.
I understand you have a good story about a spelling test.
Teacher asked me, or had to write, and rather spell the word garage, and I was dumbfounded, and I turned my head, and there was a sign right outside my window, and there it was, garage. I never forgot that. Yeah.
What do you remember from your teen years Is there anything that stands out?
Well, we grew up in a small town, and there was a couple, a husband and wife, who taught square dancing. And so that was one of the weekly activities, especially during the summer, that all of the teenagers went to. But there were always parades, and they had Halloween parties with costumes. And I remember one year I took the prize for the best costume when I dressed like a maiden with in the Renaissance period, you know, with the tall hat and the. So there were a lot of activities planned. Sports, always high school, football, basketball. My brother was co-captain of the football team, and he played on the basketball team, so I was always there to cheer him on. So.
Ruth, did you have any nicknames?
Oh, do I have to tell you those? My brother called me, being boys what they will, and going to be picking on his sister, always called me Crisco, fat in the can, and that was not very complimentary. I, on the other hand, called him Sonny, which was his nickname until we got into high school. Then he decided that he wanted to be called Roger, and he refused to answer me if I called him Sonny. So he's now Roger. But,
How about you, Ted? Did you have any nicknames?
No. No, I can't remember. No.
Just from Theodore to Ted?
Ted. It was always Ted. My relatives called me Theodore, naturally. But kids' name, it's always Ted.
when you were in the Navy, they called you Greek, didn't they?
Well, that's something else you didn't ask about in the Navy, yeah. Yeah, in the Navy, my last name was very difficult for them to pronounce. And they got to the point where every place I went, they would say Greek, because then they would ask me what nationality did that name belong to. It was difficult because most Greek names were ended with an S. Somehow my father, when he wrote his name, it looked like an N, so it went Kasivalon instead of Kushavalos, L-O-S. So that was the story with my last name.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So what do you remember from the Depression?
Everything. What do you want to know?
What were the hard times for you?
Well, I was born in a time, my early recollections was, we lived in New York City, one avenue away from Central Park West. That was our playground, really. And my father always took us for a walk in the park, but we used to go by ourselves, which I thought was very unusual. It was just a block away, we'd play and then come back home. But anyway, that was when my father was working and my mother was working, and etc. But everybody seemed to be, at that age, you know, it seemed as though that we were just happy about what we were doing. There was didn't worry about food on the table. I mean, being young and everything, but I do remember later on some of the things that, after reading about the Depression and everything, I could feel it and remember it all. Soldiers from World War I selling apples at the railroad stations, the elevators, for 5 cents a piece they'd buy, and there was a lot of, in them days they called, what we call street people today, they were called hobos, and they slept in the Central Park. And I remember how they slept in little wooden huts that they built with pieces of boards, and that's Depression. And up until I was 13 years old, I seen a lot of it.
Oh, yeah.
We rode the elevator from one end of Manhattan to the other for 5 cents. I never paid. I was short enough to scoot underneath the... No, that's very strong in my mind.
Yeah.
New York.
How about you, Ruth? What did you remember about the Depression?
I don't think that we thought of ourselves as poor, although I guess we really were. I can remember, like during the war, my mother and aunt making soap. My aunt lived with my grandfather in the same place, and this was my mother's sister. And this grandfather had a pump at the kitchen sink, had an outhouse. I was 12 years old when he got electricity in his house, and I can remember my mother and my aunt sending my cousin and I, my cousin Helen, who was my age, sending us, and we couldn't have been more than 7, 8 years old. They lived down what we called the lane. It was just a dirt road that went down to the house that was off any paved roadway, and they sent us up to the next neighbors to get lye for the soap, and warning us, you know, don't spill that lye now, you know, it'll burn you. And when I think about that, that was a lot of responsibility for young kids to have, but they trusted us to do that. And of course, my grandfather now always had a pig, so he had the bacon smoked, and they always saved all of the fat from the pig to use in making the soap. But that was one of the things, along with the ration coupons.
What were the fun things you remember about growing up?
Fun things. Ooh.
Cooking.
It sounds like you have a good answer.
Oh, God. She hesitated, just like I hesitate sometimes, but she loves cooking, that's all. She just loved to cook.
Well, I always like to eat. Everybody knows that in
Well,
the family.
And so her brother playing sports in high school, and Ruth was in the kitchen. She never did anything else but. She worked in the kitchen all the time she was in high school. That's what
did.
she told me.
Yeah, I did. I worked and got 50 cents a day for working in the kitchen.
Of your home?
No, in the kitchen at school.
Oh, okay.
So we got our free lunch. My best friend and I, actually, in high school, worked the whole 4 years in high school in the kitchen, in the cafeteria. And we got 50 cents a day, so we got a check of $2.50 from the town. And so but we always had, I had a paper route from when I was 10 years old. Both my brother and I had paper routes. And I remember cleaning house for a lady down the street. I was probably 13, 14 when I went to clean house for her. She ran a flower shop. And I got 35 cents an hour for cleaning the house. And I remember the gal that she fired when she hired me. The reason she got fired is because she would dust all around the doilies, and she wouldn't move them. So I had been taught better. I remember hating to dust when I was a kid, and we had this old-fashioned dining room table with the claw feet, and of course all the little grooves would get dust in them, and my mother would send me in to dust. And I was pretty young back then, so I was taught how to do housework at an early age. So those were lessons well learned.
Ted, can you remember some of the odd jobs you had as a child? Did you have ways that you...
Oh, boy. I guess
The Chinaman's laundry.
Oh, yeah. When I was probably 10, 12 years old, we lived in a tenement house on Columbus Avenue in Manhattan. I was able to deliver iron shirts to some of the high-rises there, where mostly business people, doctors, lawyers lived, 1 block away from where we lived. And I used to get a nickel for deliveries. And that was a great thing for me. I was able to...
There was a Chinese laundry, right?
There was a Chinese laundry right below in the entrance to our building. That was my early recollection of getting my own money, a nickel. I don't remember what I did with it, but...
And then when you moved to Lowell, you were doing shoe shining.
Oh, well, that's another thing. When I was 13 years old, and I was 14, 15, 13, 14, 15. I shined shoes for in coffee houses. The Greek community at that time all went to coffee houses and Saturdays and Sundays, and they were fussy about their shoes. They all liked to have their shoes shined. So I made money then at 5 cents a shine, shining shoes on Saturdays and Sunday mornings, and did that for a few years. My parents' income was, my father couldn't work, my mother couldn't work, and I had to quit school.
Your dad got hit by a car and lost his leg.
Oh yeah, and leaving out
So
all
that-
the tragedy part.
Yeah.
On top of it all, what happened to my father, he walked between two cars right across the street from where we lived, and he got hit by a young man. His father just bought him a brand new car, and hit my father as he walked out onto the roadway between two cars, and had his leg cut off, and almost lost his other leg. Boy, this is getting nearer. And this was the year was 1936, I guess, right?
I
yeah.
think we figured that.
Huh?
Was it? Yeah, 1936.
Anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
So this was a double tragedy in our family, both for my father and my mother, and for me as the oldest. I really was very much affected by it all. My brother and my sister, they were so young they didn't really feel the impact like I did, you know. And
So you had a lot more responsibility then?
well, it grew on me because my dad, when he couldn't work and all the rest, and I was in high school, I knew I had to go to work. So when I went to sophomore in high school, I quit and went to work. And I worked for 6 days a week in a restaurant for my first job. And I worked 12 hours a day. And I think the total week's pay, I think, was $17. And I had to pay $2 for a room. And I took whatever money was left, gave it to my father. You know.
How do you suppose all that affected you for the rest of your life? Were there lessons?
I could go on for a long. It affected me quite a bit, and me over my sister and my brother. Then I'm up to about, after quitting, I had several jobs that I worked long hours and got short pay, and always gave my pay at home. I worked what they call WPA. It was a government-sponsored thing that if your parent couldn't work, they would take the oldest child and give them a job. Otherwise, they didn't qualify. I qualified at 18 years old, and I made $24.80, I think it was, $24.80 every 2 weeks. And I was able to keep the $2.80 and gave the $24 to my parents to keep paying the bills. And both my dad, no legs, you know, walked on a cane all the rest of his life, and my mother had a nervous breakdown all through it all. So there was a double. I always had a lot of responsibility, I believe. You know, I inherited it, and I stayed with it. You know, got out of high school, like I say, I went to work, and then came the war time. War came along, and all us guys, all my friends, everybody joined. I don't think I know of anybody that was a friend of ours, maybe one or two, that didn't rush to join. And I went home to my dad and I told him I want to go in the service. But the thing that bothered me was how was my father going to live without me, you know, without my help? So in that time, the Navy gave us so much amount of money, if we would take part of our pay, and we'd send it back to your parents. And my father didn't want me to go, but he didn't get in my way. And he let me go.
And then what did he do with all the money that you sent home as an allotment?
Well, yeah. My brother was younger than I. He was only 17 then, and I was about 19, so he wanted to follow me, but my father wouldn't sign so he could go in, because it was required that his signature. And my brother talked me into going to my father, and he said, I'll sign a paper to send money home to Dad, like you, but I want to go in the service because everybody was going. So I went to my father. It was hard for me to do this, but I convinced my father to let my brother go. And the reason that bothered me was because my father cried when I tried to get his permission, you know. he didn't cry when I went, which, anyway, where am I going now?
When you got out of the service, what did your dad do with the money that you had sent home?
Boy, you told me, yeah, you're telling me that this, when we came home, all the time we felt comfortable, both me and my brother, from what I remember, is that we were sending money home and at least they were taken care of. So anyway, I came home, and after a while, my dad, I don't know, after I was home about the first year, he wanted to know why I didn't get married because I had my feeling of still taking care of my father and mother. Both my brother and sister, one left the house, the son, and my sister got married when she was only 18 and whatever, but he said to me, why don't you buy a house? And I said, Dad, I don't have no money for a house. And he says, I got some money. All the money I sent home, he put in the bank. And he went to work
I'm sorry.
as a cripple sitting at a factory doing something. And he tried to give us the money, to me and my brother, to buy houses. We wouldn't take the money.
They made a lot of sacrifices for each other.
Yeah. See, my mother was sick, and my father always had great respect for my father and mother. Especially my father, because he went through for us, and what my mother went through all them years, it bound me to my parents in such a way that I never thought of getting married, but I don't know. He just told me one day, he says, you're getting old enough. He says, why don't you get married? And I shied women, girls, Even, see, I lived in an area where it was brought up in a Greek neighborhood, and their way of living was a lot different than mostly in America, and we were influenced by a lot of it. But anyway, like fixed marriages, we called them in Greek fixed-up marriages, you say it in English, proxenias, When a boy or a girl was getting married, they usually the parents got together and they said, yeah, this guy,
Arranged it.
I don't know if you know about that, but,
Tell me about your marriage then.
well, most of the fellas I was brought up married their own kind per se, both religiously and ethnically. And in our case, me and my brother's case, it struck me funny because it seemed as though we didn't marry in our own kind, which was, we were brought up Orthodox and Greeks, just like my mother. She joined my father in the church. We both married outside of our own kind per se, and both of us ended up tragically married to
The wrong
bad
person.
marriages.
Can you
And
tell me the names of your children?
my oldest boy is named Thomas, and my daughter's name was Roseanne, and then I had a boy by the name of Stephen, and then my youngest boy was named
Frank.
Francis,
Francis, but we
Francis
call
after my
he
brother.
wanted to be
I'm
called
staring
Frank.
out in the woods here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we get back to Ruth a little bit
Yes.
now? You
Okay.
We do.
I was married too. When I got out of high school, I married someone within a year of graduation from high school, and had 3 children, Joel, Glenn, and Clarence, whom we call Jamie, who now wants to be called CJ. When he was we started off calling him Baby. He was the baby of the family, and then we called him BB. And when he was about 2 years old, he said, "What are the names of those animals on Popeye that eat the house?" And and his name was Clarence James. So I said, "Wouldn't you like to be called Jamie?" So that's when he came to, "What are the names of the animals on Popeye that eat the house?" I said, "You mean termites?" And he said, "Yep, that's me, Jamie the termite." So for the longest time, we called him the termite. Ted and I were lucky we found each other.
What year was that you married?
That was a silly thing to do for any woman. In 1965. And I think what brought us together was the fact that we saw a need in each other, really, to have not only just that we needed parents for our children, but I think we both had the same values. We both were the oldest in the family and knew what it was to struggle and to work hard. And I think we just had the sense that he needed a little more convincing than I did, that this marriage would work and we, everything would work out fine. And
So who proposed to whom?
well, I think I chased him. And if you ask Tom, his oldest boy, Tom, was living with him before he got custody of the three younger kids. And if you asked Tom, Tom would say, "Oh yeah, I remember you calling my dad all the time on the phone." I think he was a little gun shy, a lot of gun shy, maybe I should say.
Good job.
I think that we went together for 4.5 years before we married, so it took a while.
See, it was tougher for me as a father, because getting custody of babies. My children were 12, 8, and what were they?
Well, no, Frank was 5 years old when we got married, I think, right?
And having no
So,
mother, I mean, and that had a lot to do with, here I am going with Ruth and seeing each other, and I mean, God, I got to realize the mess she was in, and I was in worse mess than she was, I kept saying, and I guess that's what brought us together.
What do you think has held you together all these years?
All those years, all this together, yeah.
Well, I think raising children, both kind of had the same idea about raising kids and trying to direct them to do the right thing and live the right kind of a life. And I think that the struggles, I always said we had more kids than money, and we did. Ted he drove in the motor pool at Hanscom Field, and I didn't work initially, and I did get a job. We were living across the street from Zayre's department store, and I remember getting a job
let me
from
interrupt you.
9 to 5 I could work.
When I went on the base, my base salary was $1.59, was it? $1.59 an hour. So our pays were very small. We
Yeah.
struggled.
So
Oh,
you
we
lived on
did.
love.
Well, we lived up.
Determination.
My God, we did. We really did. And I can honestly say I enjoyed it. The way both of us together, I was very lucky.
If you had a grandchild soon, what advice would you give them about marriage?
Oh, God. Today, I'm lost.
I think you have to. The
I'm
first
lost.
thing in marriage is you have to have trust and respect for each other, and I think if anything breaks that, then it just becomes very, very difficult. So I'd say, you have to be true to each other and work hard, because having gone through a divorce, I think that those problems that can exist in any relationship. And a lot of the young people today feel as though it's so easy to run away from it, and you're going to find all the thunder and lightning with another person, and that wears off awfully quickly, and you're down back to the same problems. If you haven't fixed what's hurting in you, you're just going to carry it to the next relationship. So stay together and work at it.
Do you have on marriage? Do you have any advice on raising children?
Oh boy,
Oh,
they should all come with directions stamped on their behind. It would
Yeah.
be so much easier.
All kids are different.
Do you think back over your life? Can you think of any theme or thread that ran through your life? Anything that was always a constant?
Always constant.
I think we both grew up in an era
We're
we
needing
had.
somebody.
Mhm.
You lose your mother, you lose your father, you lose your grandfather, you're still, what are you
Yeah.
hanging on to? You can hang on to yourself. You're selfish. You don't care. That's my way of looking at it. I would have when I think of it, if I was bitter against women per se, and I loved my mother and I respected my father, and I think that's what my answer to it all is.
Okay. That's yours, and how about you, Ruth?
I lost my train of thought listening to yours.
Huh?
I said I lost my train of thought listening to yours.
Yeah.
I think that we came out of an era where people worked hard. You had to work hard for things, and if you wanted to be successful, that was something that you learned to stick with it. We didn't have much money when the kids were growing up. We took a lot of. We did the whole house over, put in all new floors, windows, doors, ceilings. We have a 3-family house, and we worked together on that. And I think that those are some of the things. Life was not easy, but I think we're a product of our times, because I don't think that life was easy back when we were young. You know, people today do have more affluence and access to more things, but that can be a double-edged sword, because you don't want to spoil your kids. You somehow or other you have to instill that work ethic, and I think it's harder. It was easy for us when our kids wanted things to say no, we couldn't afford it, because they saw that that's how we were living. I think it's much more difficult today for parents with all the affluence to deny their children. And so to be able to instill that work ethic rather than having mom and dad give it to them, I think that's sometimes a much harder message to get across. Parents somehow have to learn to do that with their kids with love. You have to be, I think you have to be sometimes a tough taskmaster in order to get that message across to kids.
Ruth, if you could choose 3 words to describe him, what 3 words would you just use?
Passionate. He gets just as angry easily as he can be loving. He's serious and intense. That's 3 words.
How about you, Ted? If you could pick 3 words to describe her, what would you say?
Well, 3 words, wow. He was consistent. We worked at it, and it seemed as though it was always an eye to eye. I had to back off a little, she had to back off a little, whatever. We agreed, and we had one thing in common, was the welfare of our children and raising them to do a lot better than we did.
Okay. All right. Ruth, what's the best compliment you ever received
From who?
from anybody?
The best compliment.
I don't
Well, I think that usually people thought of me as a good cook, and that's probably a part of being, the mother in a house full of 7 kids, and so that did me well.
All right. Okay.
As you can attest, my kids would all tell you they belong to the Clean Plate Club, which was a big mistake, because now most of them are battling the Battle of the Bulges. Even Ted.
And what's the best compliment you ever received?
I just had it on my mind, it just slipped too. Well, the best compliment was, I could tell from the kids that they got a lot of help from, my children got a lot of help from Ruth, and she was consistent, and I don't know, it was hard for them to express themselves, but I could see it in their faces,
Okay.
you know?
Okay. Tell me a little bit, I would like to talk about the present now. In a week or a month, let's talk about what are the things how do you keep busy? Do you have clubs, organizations, hobbies?
Well, we devoted most of our time at home, I know. And Ruth was always helping people, neighborhood situations. She was able to take care, because she didn't have to work. And that's the other thing. Ruth, when she went to school, she got out of school, she went back to college, which I never was able to do. And she kept towing the line, just as long as, with an education, she could have went to work and gained her own momentum, you know, but, you know, she stood by me, and it took time to work with all them kids, 7 kids.
Well, now that the kids are gone, do you belong to any clubs?
Actually, I was involved in the neighborhood organization for about 7 years, and then it reached a point where it was taking 24 hours of the day when people would call and ask you to do things for them that they could do for themselves. And it reached a point where I said, I need to reclaim my life. But I've always been, I've always done a lot of sewing and making quilts and doing family genealogy, and now I'm on the board of directors at Lowell Mental Health. But that doesn't take much time. So Ted, on the other hand, belonged to the Greek American Legion, and I think one of the things, I was shocked when I discovered that this loudmouth Greek that I was married to was really a very timid man. And it was like, wow, I see that in him. And so he's always felt more comfortable with people that he knows. And he's been going, when I was involved in the neighborhood, he was involved at the Greek American Legion, and he still goes down there, but much less frequently. He's Mr. Fix-It, and he's at a point where he still can climb the ladder to the up 3 floors. We have a 3-story building, and he can climb the ladder and do repair work on the outside of the building. And I think he does it so he can prove that he can still do it at 85.
No, prove it to who?
To yourself.
No, I-
And
I'm
so
not trying to
I
prove
call him
anything.
Mr. Fix-It, and he's at a point now where he's going around the house trying to make jobs because he's got to keep busy.
Okay. One thing we didn't touch on is the role of faith in your life. Is there anything you'd like to talk about? Was that ever, did you have 2 faiths coming together when you got married?
We did, and I was born and raised as a Protestant, baptized in a Protestant church, which played a big role when I was much younger. We went to Sunday school every Sunday, and I went to church. I sang in the choir when I was a teenager, went to youth group. And Ted was raised as a Greek Orthodox. And I think that when we came together, he had fought for his children who his ex-wife had placed in with Catholic Charities in foster homes. So I think I knew, although we never talked about it, that because he was fighting based on religion, that he would not be able to change his religion. So when we got married, and my 3 boys were still pretty young, and so we joined the Orthodox Church and took the rites of chrismation and became Greek Orthodox. And we still celebrate with the Greek traditions like Greek Easter as opposed to the Western Easter. So we're not churchgoers really, but I think that we both have, I think we both feel that we have good Christian values, and that we try to live our lives
I based
that
on
way.
Right.
Yeah.
Sounds nice.
Okay. How would you like to be remembered, Ruth?
As being a loving mother, wife, grandmother, great-grandmother. So,
Ted, how would you like to be remembered?
The way I lived my life. I hope my kids would understand why I did things that later years that caught up to them or bothered them, or probably why did my father did this or did that. So I'm hoping they realized what I did do and what Ruth did do and what we did together, and that would be it for me.
what would you like to have written on your tombstone?
On my tombstone, my father's name, but they can't do that. Yes, I mean, when you talk about it, I got a Purple Heart in World War II, and it qualifies me to be buried in Arlington Cemetery. The reason I want to be buried there, I want to put my father's name there.
Okay, good. And how about you, Ruth? What would you like written on your tombstone?
Well, I'm going to be buried next to Ted at Arlington, and so they don't do any kind of real fancy writing, so I'm just going to be remembered as his wife, I guess. Because he asked me, where do you want to be buried? Do you mind being buried in Arlington? I said, not as long as I can be buried next to you. That's where I want to be. So I see that as my place.
Is there any special message you'd like to give to your children and your grandchildren?
I think that all parents, not just me, but I believe that all parents, what you really want for your children is that they are doing something constructive with their lives and that they're at peace within themselves and where they're at in their life. To me, that's what success is. Not how much money you make or how many toys you have, but that you're at peace with yourself and with the loved ones around you. I think if we can reach that goal as human beings, that we're okay.
What's the best present you ever got?
Best present? Oh, I don't know. Him.
You're supposed to smile when she says that. What's the best present you ever got?
See, that's why I say we didn't have much money. We were talking with Glenn yesterday, I guess it was, and we were talking about houses because Glenn's got a beautiful place here, and our house is I found it on a city map in 1832. So we know it's been there that long. So it's a very old house. And Ted bought it in 1950 when he was with his first wife. So we've been in that. He's been in that house for 56 years. He's been in that house. So we've done the whole house over. I'll do new doors, windows, floors. Mr. Fix-It. And it doesn't matter what it is.
Even if I didn't know how to do it, I did it over two times.
He'd find a way to fix everything, from the simplest thing,
Okay.
I was lucky. I was able to retire the government. I had three doctors recommend that I retire at that time because if I didn't, there was minuses involved. I mean, it was really advice. A lot of people that were in my position didn't take the advice, but I'll tell you, I took it. And I've been very fortunate. And I've been hit by a train and almost killed her. I went through the war and missed getting killed there. And a train killed me. I had lung cancer.
Yeah. And
I'm going on 85, and I never thought I'd ever reach 85.
What do you think? This is all good luck? You think it's...
Well, no, I deep down, I mean, it's somebody's up there looking for helping me because, like I say, everything that was bad in the long run, when I look back, I mean, I was lucky.
Yeah, the good Lord was looking out for you.
I did the best. We did the best, and what I want my kids to know is I did the best I could. Maybe it wasn't good enough, but I did the best I could.
Good.
Yeah.
You know?